Thank you.
Thank you very much.
How many years were you at Washington Theological?
Chicago. It's Catholic. 48.
Catholic Theological.
Catholic Theological Union. 48.
Is that a record?
Yes.
It's going to be late. He said to go ahead and introduce and start on time, and then you'll
Okay.
sign.
Sounds good. Thank you.
The only ones longer were founders.
Can I share that? That's
Sure,
pretty
if you want.
cool.
Sure.
48?
48. Yeah.
Wow. Were you like a record young hire?
Well, we were pretty much all pretty young in those years. But I taught here before I taught there.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Cool.
Good,
Good,
thank
good.
you.
I didn't want to stop you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Thank you for coming today.
You are?
Ryan.
Ryan.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming today.
You are?
Right.
Right. Good to meet you.
Jason, thank you for
Jason, thank you very much. Thank you.
Charles.
Charles.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. His whole class came. He must have sent this class to go and introduce yourself and welcome her. I thought, isn't that good?
Yeah, I think so too. He does a great job with
They,
that.
oh, and I'm going to tell you, they got good handshakes.
Good. Good. All right. You want me to start right away at 3?
That's fine.
Okay.
Oh, here come two more. Yes, sir. Yes, and you are?
I'm Alton.
Alton. Good to meet you. Thank you.
Bailey. Thank you for coming.
Welcome, everybody. As you come in, feel free to take a seat. Before you do, if you want to help yourself to some treats, we have water and sweet treats over on this end. And we have
I need water.
Bubbler, which for anybody who should know, it has caffeine in it. So if that is a good thing, then grab it. And if it's not a good thing, stay away from that flavored water, okay? So it's a delicious treat that students love, made here in Wisconsin. But I just want to welcome you all to the Catholic Intellectual Tradition series that the Mission Integration team has been hosting this year. It is our attempt to try to humanize and help make accessible the principles that Catholic universities operate with an understanding of. And so we have invited Sister Dianne Bergant, a member of the Congregation of the Sisters of St. Agnes right here in Fond du Lac, to be our speaker this year and to guide us through those principles. And I just learned from Sister, now we all know she is a world-class Old Testament biblical scholar. I asked her how long had she taught at the Chicago Theological Union?
Catholic.
Catholic Theological Union.
Mm-hmm.
Did I get it right?
That's right.
That's the one. And she said 48 years. And I asked if that's a record, and she said the only way it's not is if it was the founders themselves. So I feel like that deserves a round of applause in and itself. So thank you for coming and sharing. Every time we've gathered, she wows me with how much energy she has. This is your retirement gig, right? Like, this is what she does just on her when she's relaxing. So enjoy this. This talk is on faith and reason, how they go together, and what is theology. So thank you so much for being here, Sister, and we look forward to your talk.
Thank you very much. Sorry. Okay, thank you. I'd like to read what this particular intellectual tradition says about the topic. Lest it doesn't sound like that's what I'm developing, but it is. So we call this faith and reason. The Catholic intellectual tradition presupposes that what is knowable by human reason and by God's revelation are not only compatible, but are mutually informing. This is true, sort of. Not always are we in a kind of dance together. We're not always on the same track. And I'll talk a little bit about that this afternoon. And by that, I'm not suggesting that one is wrong while the other point of view is right. I'm saying that certain things within society change in our understanding of certain things in society seem to change much more quickly than does our religious tradition. It's extraordinarily difficult to change religious, spiritual, or theological understanding because people are bound to it, those who accept it, are bound to it in faith. It's easier to change science. Science, a significant scientific point of view or historical point of view can easily change in a generation. Religion cannot, or does not at least, because of this other binding. So when it says they are not only compatible, they can be, but also mutually informing. And to that I want to say they should be. Therefore, the Catholic tradition contemplates and seeks to understand these truths through a mutually illuminating dialogue of faith and reason. You do anything about church history, you discover that in a certain sense, there is always a strand of struggle between faith and reason, between theology and cosmology today, between theology and sexual practice and understanding sexual behavior today, between truth, or fake truth, if you said, and theology today. So they are not always friendly. They do not always support it. But in a very real sense, it's one of those should be kind of situations. God is the source and goal of both, unless you've got two gods. Both the truths of faith and the truths of reason. Because of their unity of origin and final end, reason and faith are not in contradiction. Rather, any apparent contradictions are an inviting to pursue fuller understanding. And it's interesting what changes and how fast or how slow it changes. Centuries ago, St. Anselm said something that theologians cling to passionately, and that is faith seeking understanding. That's what theology is. Faith seeking understanding. If it is faith, we're not talking about doctrine. We use the words interchangeably, but they're not really the same. Doctrine is what we think we know. Faith is what we know we don't know. That's very important. We think we know doctrine. For example, that there are three persons in one God. We know that. We know what the words mean. We have absolutely no idea, really, what that means. But we know what the words mean. We know what we're trying to say when we say that there are three persons in one God, or that Jesus had two natures. That's dogma. There are many people who think that this is all theology. This is what is known as fundamental theology. There are many people think that the church is tied up in doctrine. That's not really the case. There's very little dogma that we are bound to believe. And most dogma, if not all dogma, is beyond our understanding. We know there's something there, we just don't know how to talk about it. And consequently, sometimes the way we talk about it changes over history. Doctrine can change. In my lifetime, there is absolutely nothing in my religious life now that was in my life when I entered. And there's nothing that was in my life when I joined the convent that we still do today, except eat and sleep and pray. But not specifics. We don't live the same way. We don't teach the same way. Some of us don't teach. I mean, it's very different. And why? Because there was change, Second Vatican Council. Now, not everybody was happy to change. That was 60 years ago, and there are people who are fighting Mass in Latin because there are people insisting on Mass in Latin. So things change, okay? So I go back to what Saint Anselm said. Faith seeking understanding. How do we understand these things? So rather than give a lecture on fundamental theology, I thought I'd show you. Now, I'm a biblical theologian, so what do we do with the Bible? I mean, how do we interpret the Bible? You may not have signed up for a course in interpreting, or you should always go home with a new word, at least a word that's not familiar. So this afternoon, I'm going to talk about hermeneutics. I'm not talking about eisegesis. I'll talk about hermeneutics. And I won't tell you what that means. All right, I'll use the purple one. What we have, what's going on right now, is communication. And in communication, there are fundamentally three basic components. All right? There is the speaker, there is the hearer, and there is the message. Now, we all know that, okay? When it's written, what you have is I do not have Zehner Bloser handwriting. Okay, what you have is the writer. And you have the reader. And in the middle, what you have is the text. Now, when you read anything, you're here, okay? You're here, and you have this. And this is what you're concerned about. Chances are, you're not primarily concerned about the writer. Let's say you're not reading a textbook. You're reading a novel or something. All right? You're not concerned, who the writer is. You're primarily concerned with the text. You're not even concerned with yourself. That all operates, automatically. But you're concerned with the text. What's the story? You have already got the story from the reader, from the writer. So the writer, in a certain sense, is oblivious of anything. I find it interesting when somebody talks about something, because it's my business, there are certain questions I always ask: who's the author and who's the publisher? Most people don't ask that when you tell them about a book you're reading. They don't say, who's the publisher? I do, because it means something. Or who is the writer? I do, because it tells me how much I should believe what they say. That's the case. I mean, and if you have a good author, then you presume you can take him or her word for granted. All right? But when you're just reading the text, that's all you're interested in. When you read, you do not add to the text. You're the reader, you're not the writer. You don't read and add to the text, because then you're changing the story. Okay, this is very simple. There are at least 3 different ways of reading the scripture. You can read the scripture and you want to know, what did the original writer intend by writing the text that way? What's the relationship between the writer and the text? That is extraordinarily important. Let me change the context and say, in speaking today, in speaking in this country, instead of the writer and the text, it's the speaker and the text. What if you can't trust the speaker? And we struggle with that. People throw around language in this country in this particular point of history. Throw around fake this, fake that. How do you know what's true? So when you're reading, in a certain sense, you don't add to the text. You don't change the text. Not if you're a good reader. So when we talk about the scriptures, you don't add to the text. Frequently that happens when people preach. What they do is add to the text. For example, somebody once asked me, only once, asked me in the classroom, why don't you add, when Jesus was let's say in the garden, I don't remember where Jesus was, but I remember that it was about Jesus. When Jesus was in the garden, what did he really say? And so some people add the words, but they're adding the words from their own context. This is what they would say if they were in the garden, not what Jesus would say. All right? And this all, in a certain sense, is dependent on how you can rely on how you can rely on the writer. Now, if I have confused you, it is simply because reading is really an extraordinarily complicated thing. Reading to get information, reading to get interpretation is extraordinarily complicated. All right? Now, I'm going to go back to reading the Bible. How do you read the Bible? How does a theologian work? What does a theologian do? What is happening right now in this room is a religious experience. Now, not that anybody is having a vision, but what is going on here, whenever we are dealing with our religious tradition, teaching our religious tradition, developing our religious tradition, it is a religious experience. There is in Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, in chapter 11, the context of the story is Eucharist. It's a passage many of you know. The passage goes, I hand down to you what was handed down to me, that on the night before he died, Jesus took bread, and then he goes on and tells the story of the Eucharist. But the point I want to make is the handing down. I hand down to you what has been handed down to me. There are two things that I often said when I began a class at CTU. And at CTU, the student body is fundamentally, and it's all graduate theology, fundamentally preparing to be ministers in the church, male and female, lay and ordained. So they're all preparing for the same job, for the same ministry, for the same life work. And so I would say to them, I would take that passage from Corinthians, as I said to you, and I would say to them, I hand down to you what has been handed down to me so that you can hand it down to others. That's handing down the tradition. That's teaching theology. What goes on in a classroom is not simply papers and books and memorization, because the teacher hands down the tradition. Our religious tradition is a treasure. People have died because of our religious tradition. The very first one, Jesus himself. But other people have died for what they stand for religiously. And the Jews feel that way, and so do the Mormons feel that way, and so does Islam feel that way. It is a treasure. Why? Because in a certain sense, it holds in the hands of the teacher or the preacher that which is faith-seeking understanding. And that has to do with our relationship to reality, whatever you want to call God. Reality, the fundamental wow, somebody once said. All right, so that's the tradition. So I hand down what's going on now. I'm handing down this to you. You can discount it if you like, but I have handed it down. And I am presuming that whether you're Roman or Greek Orthodox or Lutheran, there is some kind of tradition. Otherwise, why would you come to a religious school? Which means that I'm handing down our common tradition. It has been handed down to me, now I hand it down to you so that you can hand it down to others. And you will do it however you should do it. You must do it however you plan your life, not just in teaching. Every once in a while, on Saturday night, on the news ends with some heroic person in the country. Big thing about this heroic person that drove the school bus or whatever. That was who takes the kids across the street, the crossing guard. Or a man who makes pizza. I mean, those are heroic people as well, not just anybody who's on television. That means every one of you has a serious responsibility to hand down the tradition. And you do it by the way you live your life. You do it by the choices that you make. That's one thing I would say to them. And I would say this to them as well. You're going to work hard in this class, not because I'm a hard teacher, though I might be, and not because the material is hard, though it might be. But you're going to work hard because the people of God deserve the best that you have to give, and they haven't always gotten it. Now, that's true about all of us. So when I talk about what's theology, that's what theology is. I'm handing it down to you. I want to show you what has to be done from a biblical point of view when we develop. Oh, one last thing. When you hand it down, you never hand it down the way you received it. Never. You leave your mark on it. Because what you have taken in and somehow either rejected, or let's presume, that you're trying to fit it into your worldview. The way you do that is unique to you. And so you leave your mark on it. Even when you repeat what somebody else says, you might concentrate on one word more than another word. So we hand down our tradition. Keep that in mind whenever you think about what is going on. You are part of it, whether you realize it or not. Because what people are doing when they live out the life of faith, whatever that means to them, they are showing. How do we know the mercy of God? But through the mercy of other people. I mean, we don't get mail. They're saying that God is merciful. We discover it from other people. And also once in a while, you actually see people who are heroic. Heroic. Because they're so simple in what they do. So heroism, it's not simply on the military field. Sometimes, it's on the football field. I mean, they got beat each other up and then help each other up when they falls down. There are ways of doing that. There are also ways of kicking the guy when he's down. I've watched football games. I played football. All right, so we do that to each other rather than be decent women and men. Okay, so what is theology all about? Theology is looking at the text, trying to find out what is the writer trying to say. Don't interpret it merely from your point of view. Now that's something. To get the reader's point of view, that's one point of view. To get the writer's point of view. To get the reader's point of view. But there's not only one reader. Here's where cultural diversity comes in. Right? The question of a feminist interpretation or feminism. We're way beyond, the striking age. I mean, if you struggle with feminism in a certain sense, it's not a new issue to struggle with, in the same way as some other cultural issues are new cultural issues. I am not dismissing it. I'm going to give an example of it. The way women read the text is different than the way men read the text. Not every text, but some texts. And feminism from a biblical or from a theological point of view began by being concerned about language. I can endure some gender-specific language. There is a word that drives me crazy. I cannot tell you how I resent it when anyone refers to me as a guy. Look at me, I'm not a guy. And say, well, we mean both. Well, then, when they call a group guys, when they call them girls, then I'll have no problem being called a guy. But we would never call the guys girls, but they can call the girls guys. That's dealing with language. All right? And feminists look at the Bible, it is very gender specific. I wouldn't say it's sexist. It's not that kind of language. It's gender specific because that was part of their culture. It's still part of our culture. When Kamala Harris was running for president, frequently you would hear, can a woman be president? You never hear the question, can a man be president? You never hear that. You presume that's a gender specific, that's a sexist point of view. All right, so that's an example when we talk about, the writer. The writer belongs to a culture. The biblical writers belong to ancient cultures. And so in ancient cultures, there was that kind of sexual division. Women were second-rate citizens. Sometimes they believed women were not fully human. Right? So there were different understandings of what women were. There certainly were different interpretations of people with physical disability. Many traditional societies, for their shaman or their religious man, they would take somebody who had a physical disability and make them the shaman, make them the sacred man. It's very interesting. They didn't know what to do with somebody with a disability because they didn't know what category to put him in. So they made him the holy man. So that's not uncommon that societies don't know how to deal with people who are significantly different, whether that be because of gender, or because of race. Oh, I mean, shall we get into the whole question of DEI? The Catholic Church was founded on diversity, equality, and inclusivity. That's by definition, the definition of Christian theology and Christian spirituality. But it's not American. It's un-American now. Very interesting. So you can be sure that different people with different points of view are going to understand difference. That's true about the writer. It is certainly true about the reader as well. Because we interpret from our own point of view. Today, in this day and age, as I said, you've got, the biblical writer, and then the second, I forgot what 1 and 2 were. Let me erase them and put them down a different way. Oh, here it is. Sometimes I surprise myself by what I don't know. Okay, I'm concerned about the writer, not the reader. About the writer, not the reader. Okay, because the writer can be from the major groups. That's an J. The major groups, and this is an M. Or can be from a secondary group. But even as I say that, what makes it secondary? I mean, really, what makes somebody belong to a secondary group? Unless there is one particular model other than yourself, one particular model against which everybody else judges themselves. And I did not mean that facetiously. Because with little children, we judge people according to ourselves. Who's like me? Somebody's bigger, somebody's smaller, somebody's brown, somebody's got red hair. All right? So we judge them according to ourselves until we discover we're not the center of the universe. Most people grow out of that. Some people do not. And they keep thinking, you got to be exactly like me in order to be acceptable. All of that stuff, friends, is operative when you're reading a book, particularly when you're interpreting a book. And we're talking about theology. All of that is operative in theology. Remember, we are dealing with an ancient text. Both testaments, Old and New, we're dealing with an ancient text. And so in a certain sense, we have to point out where their cultural context is significantly different than ours. Beginning with the 60s, it was the movement for justice and equality was very strong in the world, certainly in the United States. And we discovered how racist we are, how sexist we are, how homophobic we are. All of these categories of people who, for any number of reasons, are different than we are. When I was a kid growing up, there was a boy in the neighborhood who had broken his leg. And he'd come out and play. When he didn't have to use crutches, well, he would use crutches, but when he'd run around, he would have a second belt, and he'd have his leg up like this, so that he could run around. That kid could run with crutches, you wouldn't believe it. And he was our great hero. We called him Bobby on crutches. Real, creative. But he was not kept out. He was not kept out, though he could have been. He could have been kept out of the fun because he wasn't like us. We wanted to be like him because it was something. If you had a crutch, you had a gun. You had a rifle. You could play with these things. All right? So we're talking about different writers, or the different points of view of writers. And here's where, I want to get back to what this text says here, where seeks to understand the truths through a mutually illuminating dialogue of faith and reason. Here's where that operates, faith and reason, to discover not only what did the author say, all you got to do is know how to read the original language. Already we have a problem. And the problem is no translation is perfect. So, whose translation is a good translation? Is the major man's translation the perfect translation? Or is the little woman's translation the perfect translation? Or not perfect, better? So notice the diversity here. There's tremendous diversity. So you got translation, realizing that no translation is perfect. Sometimes what is 3 words in English is 2 words in Hebrew. Sometimes what's 3 words in Greek is 4 words in English. How do you deal with translation? And so when we talk about Scripture, it's all translation. So not only do you have to deal with translation, then once you get a good translation, then whose translation is it? Is it translation from the north or translation from the south of the land? Is it a translation, again, from what period in history? Because all of Scripture originated in the mouth. It was an oral culture. The ancient, when we say, what did Isaiah write? Probably nothing. What did Isaiah preach? That's different. And then handed down in oral tradition. I had a colleague in Chicago who was an anthropologist. I learned everything I know about anthropology from my colleague. And it's fascinating, the difference in anthropology. The difference if you know a little bit of anthropology. I'll hold that and come back to it later. But when we talk about anthropology, again, we're concerned about the reader. How do they understand woman, the place of woman? Even that, the place of woman. The language is hateful language for some women. Because somebody else determines women's place. Somebody else determines the place of people of color. Somebody else determines. If they could determine it themselves, you know what would happen? I want to give my credit for something. When I first went down to Chicago, I think it was the 2nd or the 3rd year, we were revising our manual. And so I was asked, to give a talk on how one revises a manual for the school. And by this point, I was already friends with the faculty and administration. If I didn't know them, I would never have said what I said, but I was friends and they understood what I was saying. And I said, I think to revise the manual, you determined that the manual should be revised. What if I don't think it should be revised? I'm not convinced we should do it. And I stood up to them, you know, and they said, well, what do you think we should do? I said, I think we ought to go on a field together. And number one, talk about whether or not we need a revision. And if we need the revision, then who does it? That seldom happens. Let me tell you, we revised the manual. All right? But we talked about it first. And we talked about whether we need one, or is this just busy work? And if we need it, how are we going to structure our classes? But it was talked about first. It was not simply handed down by administration. And I am not, by saying that, I am not in any way intending to demean the importance of administration. But there is something to be said about people who are being governed have something to say about it. Maybe what they have to say is not going to be heard because it's not advisable or it's not possible. But to be able to say something, all right, to be able to contribute, to say whether or not my insight, because it's going to be my life or my school or whatever, that my insights cost something, or I should not costs, I don't want it to cost something, means something. All right, so all of this goes on. You're trusting somebody when you trust the writer. And if you're doing interpretation, you want to find out, you know, what's the writer mean by what he or she says? And I should say, chances are it's all he, when they're putting it down in writing. It's he and she and them when they're handing down the tradition. Because in ancient societies, traditional societies, women are very much involved in the education of children, in handing down the tradition. So it's the women as well who hand down the tradition and shape it. They just don't get credit for the work, that's all. All right? But it's the women and men both who hand down the tradition. And this is constantly being done. We hand it down, you know, day after day, week after week, year after year, generation after generation. All right? And you've got to decide, you make judgments. So let's say ancient Israel was sexist, and it was. So what are you going to do about it? Is there a way that you can rehabilitate the text? In other words, is there a way to keep the meaning of the text, but to express it in ways that were faithful and came from the original writer, but are not good for us today? Is there a way of doing that? That is a real challenge, because the average person doesn't know enough about what's behind what the author is saying. So here we've come, and this is the point that I brought up before with the intellectual tradition. Here's where good biblical interpretation requires knowledge of ancient history. Knowledge of ancient history, knowledge of ancient anthropology, knowledge of the ancient world commerce. The gospel for today, whether you know it or not, is a story about Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus is the tax collector. If you look at the scriptures, the New Testament, tax collectors are constantly maligned. They are no good, they're sinners. Let me explain why. There was no tax system in ancient Israel. Not a system like we have a law system. However, somebody like Mary and Joseph are paying taxes. And the taxes they have to pay is, first of all, they pay taxes to the empire, the Greco-Roman Empire. So they got to send taxes in that go to Rome. Then they live in a kingdom. So there's a king. They got to pay taxes to the king. But they also live in a small village, so there's local taxation. So there are at least 4 different levels of taxation. The fourth one would be whether or not you own your home. Then you might have to pay taxes to the owner. So already we got 4 levels. And there is no tax system, but there are tax collectors. So how are they paid? There is no salary. So they add interest to the taxes that they are already levying on the people who are poor. So for all practical purposes, it's a miracle that the people who are paying the taxes are not dirt poor, but most of them are. So no wonder tax collector was not a favored person in society. And they took, not only because they collected taxes for somebody else, but they could ask or demand of those people an exorbitant taxation fee for themselves. So no wonder that the tax collector was almost invariably a hated person, a sinful person, because they embezzled from the poor. And that's why Jesus, in the story, why the biblical authors in the story have Jesus pick out the tax collector, in order to show this is the man who is a truthful man, an honest man. And you have in this story, in today's gospel, he makes a promise: I will give back all the money I've embezzled. I will give half of my treasure away, and I will give 4 times if I have defrauded anyone. So it shows that the worst person can be the penitent. And the gospel stories are not intended simply to entertain us. At the end of every gospel story, at the end of every reading in liturgy at least, not necessarily the gospel story itself, but reading in liturgy, should be the question: how does this refer to you? Or another way of saying that, what are you going to do about it? Because that's why we read the scriptures, not to entertain each other in the liturgy. But there's some that would, some story or something in the story that would really touch us. How easy it is to hate people who appear to be better off than we are. Anyone ever think that? Show of hands, please. It's very easy to think that. That's what the story is about. And the message of the story could very well be careful. That might be the Holy One. So there's always that goes on. Or if there is you're talking about being generous. Let's say that you're looking at Zacchaeus, and he wanted to see Jesus. So the guy climbs up a tree. What adult man climbs up a tree? I did that when Santa Claus was coming down the road, but I was 7 years old. Right, but so in a certain sense, the storyteller makes him look a little foolish or desperate. Desperate, so desperate. The man with all the money, the tax collectors it's up in a tree. That's how desperate he is to see Jesus. And how about you? How far would you go so that you could see Jesus? I mean, that's where where then you bring it back. What does it say to us? What is it calling us to be? Talk about heroic. Many times it's calling us to be heroic. And there are different messages for different people. So some might be, Zacchaeus the tax collector. Some in this room might be the ones who find fault, who don't like people who have better deals or appear to have better deals, or people who don't live the way we're supposed to live. It's interesting that the enemies of Jesus were the righteous, or those who thought they were. I'm better than you are. At least I don't do this. I don't do this. There is also in the gospel the story of the Pharisee and the tax collector in the temple. So the tax collectors, it's interesting. They are always presented in the story as hated people, but frequently turn out to be the heroes. So don't judge. Don't judge and you will not be judged constantly, okay? So the writer, we have to understand, the context of the writer, all of the different issues, lest we carry them into our interpretation. But notice, it's always what's in the text. Don't add to the text. If your brilliant insight is really important, be sure the biblical writers probably thought of it first and thought, well, we don't need that. All right? So the issue is the text. But we want to talk about the readers. I always say you start with the text. You don't start with history. But the more you know about history, here's where, we can't reinterpret Scripture. We can't reinterpret theology without history, without anthropology, nowadays without science. That's an example, an interesting example as well. As I say, many people still believe in the sky god. Our prayers frequently talk about God up in heaven. Do you know what's up in heaven? Not heaven. I once heard somebody say, with new cosmology, we talk about the resurrection. Actually, we were talking about Mary, but to talk about the resurrection and the assumption. Scientists will tell us, unless they have hit something out in space, and the further you get away from the Earth, the faster you go up in space. That means that Jesus is still shooting out into space, faster and faster and faster, and Mary behind him. How ridiculous that is. And yet, the way we talk about heaven, in a certain sense, that's the heaven we're talking about. The question of evolution and the question of creation, there should be no conflict, but there is a lot of conflict. Because the Bible says, the Bible also says a lot of other things too. The Bible says that it is appropriate to kill firstborn son. The story of Abraham killing his son Isaac, not Joseph. Abraham. So the Bible says that. If you know how to manipulate the words of the Bible, you can make the Bible say just about anything. Just about anything. And we've learned how to manipulate the words in order to give justification and meaning. It's not all real cruel and people are trying to ruin it. It's unfortunately, we have not been well educated with the Second Vatican Council. We still understand so much in pre-council thinking. And that is not to say that we're going to go to hell if we don't understand it. We are not saved by what we know. We're saved by what we do. It's action. Some of the holiest people I know have terrible theology. My mother had terrible theology, but she was a holy woman. She put up with me. Right? So the issue is not how much do you know, because knowing an awful lot, success is extraordinarily seductive. The more you know, the more you think you know sometimes. It's very easy. You are part of an academic situation, environment, and knowing something is what it's all about now. And so, think about how you understand success. We all want it. It's not bad. It's ridiculous to think the only way that I can be holy is if I'm a failure. I mean, I can be a failure all by myself. I don't need anybody else to help me to do that. Neither do you. All right? So this sounds like, what is she rambling about? This all is operative when you're trying to find meaning. Faith is Theology is faith seeking understanding. We're constantly trying to figure out what's the best way of understanding that. What decisions should I make in my life? Which people should I associate with? What actions will give me a sense of fulfillment? That's constantly going on, constantly. And if you have traditions, which we all have in the plural, our traditions, in a very real sense, focus us. Focus us. All right, let's go back here to the reader, because that's who we're talking about. I got to see what my time is here. Okay. Let me just read the gospel. So you hear the story of Zacchaeus, and I want to put it within this particular context. Today's Tuesday. At that time, Jesus came to Jericho, a very prosperous city. That's important to know, because let me assure you, people in Chicago, people in New Orleans are going to read this particular gospel, and they're going to interpret it differently than you do, unless you are either from Chicago or New Orleans. Because the culture does affect the way we understand things. At that time, Jesus came to Jericho, a high-class, wealthy city, so you would expect to find that kind of person, and intended to pass through the town. He wasn't going to stop. Now, a man there named Zacchaeus, who was a chief tax collector, not simply a tax collector, a chief tax collector. Remember what I said, and a very wealthy man, was eager to see who Jesus was, but he could not see him because of the crowd, for he was short in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree in order to see Jesus, who was about to pass that way. Now, either men climbing trees was quite common in those days, and then it would not be a spectacle, or it was very unusual, and then he would have been a spectacle. And then you've got to ask a question: why does the gospel writer present Zacchaeus in that way? What point is the gospel writer trying to make? It could be, who do you think you are? Just because you got money, you idiot, climbing up a tree. So all of these details, always ask the text questions. What does it mean? Why did they choose this? Does this have some kind of meaning that's important to understand the story? So he ran ahead and climbed the sycamore tree in order to see Jesus, who was about to pass that way. Remember how many times, Jesus is passing through, and Jesus is passing by, and somebody grabs him. I don't think that's haphazard. I think there's a reason why they have him passing through, because it gives the person who needs him an opportunity to reach out. There are stories where Jesus reaches out, but there are other stories where the person reaches out, and he looks like he's passing by, and they don't want him to go. When he reached the place, Jesus looked up and said, "Zacchaeus, come down quickly, for today I must stay at your house." Now, there's the problem. There's the problem. There is in Jewish liturgical thinking, theology, the whole notion of clean and unclean. What belongs to God is clean. Clean, not like the dishes, but holy. And what does not belong to God is unclean or unholy. And it's contagious. Let's say, and blood is the source of life. Blood is the heart of life. And because it is so sacred, you don't fool around with blood. Blood, in the wrong context, can make you unclean, because you are the one that's not holy, and it can make you unclean. Consequently, that explains why women are never part of the liturgical service, because women are unclean. Women have blood issue every month. So they are never clean enough, holy enough, separate enough to participate in ritual. Okay? And as I said, anything can touch. Now, if I was unclean and I touched him, he would be unclean. All right? Husband and wife would have no relations during her menstrual period because he would become unclean, which means he can't worship. It's not a sin. It's like in the old days when you had to abstain from food and drink from midnight if you wanted to go to communion. Now we have a short period of time, but it used to be from midnight. And if you broke your fast, you didn't sin, you just couldn't go to communion. It's pretty much like that you were clean or unclean, and you could either participate or not participate, and women never could. So, to go into someone's house is a very intimate, to go into the house is intimate. To eat at the table is extraordinarily intimate because you're sharing food. And usually they eat with hands, not with knives and forks. And so how intimate that is, where we break bread, literally break bread. It makes no sense in a certain sense when at Eucharist, when he breaks the host, and we don't break anything. I mean, we're breaking bread. That's intimate. Watch a television sometime, and you have a couple sitting at the table, always with a candle, and he breaks bread, or she breaks bread, and hands it to him. That's pretty intimate. I haven't done that lately, right? If I would do it, it would be scandalous because of what it means. It's intimate. So Jesus says, we're going to eat dinner together. Jesus is the one who tells Zacchaeus. Sorry. Come down quickly, for today I must stay at your house. And he came down quickly and received him with joy. When they saw this, who's the they? The people, the tax collector? No, when they, the others, when they saw this, they began to grumble, saying, he's going to stay in the house of a sinner. And the sins are always external. External practices, not always violations, external practices. He is going to stay in the house of a sinner. But Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, behold, half of my possessions I shall give to the poor. And if I have extorted anything from anyone, I shall repay it 4 times over. Now that's a lot of money. And Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a descendant of Abraham, as are we descendants of Abraham, religiously. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save what was lost. Now, in order to have favors like this provided for us, we have to acknowledge that we are lost and need to be found. So here, Jesus accepts, but never lets it go without acknowledging that there is sin. And I have come for those who need me, those who are sinners. And isn't that all of us? I gave you a couple of ways to ask what this passage might mean to you. Another way of saying that is identify with somebody. Identify with Zacchaeus. And how would you, if you were Zacchaeus, and think about your life. Don't create another world. You already have one. But within your life, what do you owe people? Or what might you provide for people? Being a way of showing that you are transformed, that you have been called to serve others. Or maybe you identify with those who criticize. God knows there's enough to criticize. We all criticize. It's a shame we have working television sets in our houses that we criticize rather than throwing something at it because of the world in which we live. All places, all groups. Where is the peace that was promised us? I mean, we are living in a world. How are we living in this world? Are we really, what Pope Francis says, missionary disciples? By virtue of baptism, Evangelii Gaudium, his document, by virtue of baptism, we are all missionary disciples, by baptism. So in what way are you a missionary? It's the way you live. It's the way I live, not what I preach, but the way I live, the way we live, the way we interact with each other. That's how we make the world better. How's it going? Is the world better because of us? I mean, those are the kinds of questions that we should ask ourselves if nobody asks them for us when we read the scriptures. That, my friends, is handing down the tradition. Go and do thou likewise. That's from Scripture. Thank you.
All right, so do you have some time for some questions, Sister Dianne?
We got time. 2
All right.
minutes.
2 minutes. We could probably stretch that out. All right.
Okay, so just to be clear, theology is about how we come to know God, how we study God. And
It's the way we talk about it. Theology is the way we talk about it.
Because what you're describing is higher criticism, which comes out of
Yeah.
Lutheran tradition.
Yeah.
So I just want to say this because I attend a Lutheran church right now, and the only way in a Protestant tradition that you can come to know God is through reading the text. That's why there's a constant translation mania. There are so many biblical, it's like mind-boggling. But in the Catholic Church, there are other ways to know God outside of the text because the Catholic Church has a variety of traditions, like praying the rosary, let's say. They have relics. There's, belief in miracles and stuff like that. So in the Lutheran tradition, we are cessationist. And what that means is I can read the text, see the miracles, believe them to be true, but I have a hard time accepting the fact that, there would be Eucharistic miracles, or that a statue of Mary would cry or bleed. And so this is a totally different understanding of how to know God and what God is.
What Lutheran are you? ELC?
No, I grew up in the ELCA.
Is that? But you're not ELC now.
No, that's extremely liberal brand. I mean, I was raised in the ELCA, but I attend a Wells church right now, which is very conservative.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
I would use a different word. The issue is not getting to know God, getting to talk about God. Getting to know God comes from God. I mean, that's really the experience of the divine. But if I left you with the impression that that's what theology is, it's seeking understanding in the way we try to understand it, not initially,
But for a Protestant, I mean, you can concede
I did my doctorate. I did my doctoral work with Luther.
Yeah.
In Chicago.
Yeah, so you would understand the only way that a Protestant, other than a Pentecostal, they have I mean, that is like an overcorrection to the cessationist theology of a Lutheran or a Baptist.
But again, the issue is it's not so much that, that we get to know God in devotions. Devotion is our way of acting out what we think we know. So, I mean, I don't want to get real specific about words, though we have to when we're talking about theology. But I appreciate your contribution.
Yeah,
that not everybody understands it exactly the same way.
Yeah, I mean, there's a vast difference between how even Protestants approach
but you'd
the
be
text,
surprised how many Catholics probably know the scriptures in the same way as you do. I mean, but not everybody is got, the critical, and not everybody needs. I mean,
well, not everybody can. I have disabled clients and they can't read the text. So I always think that it's a fatal flaw in Protestantism. There's so much emphasis on reading the text, but my disabled clients can't read. So that's why the Catholic Church always had an appeal to me, because really anybody can walk into a Catholic church and not really have to read the Bible, because there's such a treasury within the church. I mean, you could know God through reading the lives of the saints or hearing the lives of the saints.
well, you know about the saint more than about God.
The what?
When you read the stories of the saints, you know more about the saint than you know about God, because it's their interpretation of God.
Well,
Which
and the church
but everything is interpretation.
Exactly.
And it's interpretation of interpretation. So the issue is, who's your author?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's who's your author this month.
Or what church you're sitting in.
Exactly. Thank you. Anyone else?
Other question? Come on. Brain's got to be spinning.
Here's a, over here,
Oh, we got it?
Aaron.
Oh, gotcha. All right, cool.
Yeah, you mentioned whatever you do in life, always make your mark on things before you hand them down. In what ways in your life have you made your mark?
I taught the Pope.
That's fair.
No, that's all that is. I mean, he was a nice guy, still is a nice guy. But all that is I was at the right place at the right time. I did nothing, to earn that, if it's anything to earn. I would hope. Let me say this: when people saw me around the country. In fact, I also got an email from somebody in Siberia, a former student. All right, so I've taught in a seminary for more than 45 years, about 48 years. And it is very reassuring, I want to tell you, when students come back and thank you. So you don't know you're making your mark. And if you're making a mark, you don't know what mark you're making. But it's always good when somebody thanks you for doing what you did. Teachers like to say, teaching is a thankless profession. People, I leave that to you whether or not that's true or not. But when you're teaching little kids, I never had little kids. I had 7th and 8th grade, and then I went to Marian College. I mean, as a teacher. I taught here for 5 years, part-time. And then I went to Chicago. But kids don't think of saying thank you. They think of getting out. Getting out of the room, getting out of the building, getting out of the school. That's what they think about. But it can be very reassuring. And you want to say, why didn't you say it then? But you don't, So thank you for the question.
We got time for one more.
Over here, Sharon.
All right, come in, Lee.
Okay, this is not really a question, but it's answering your question from a different perspective. Sister Dianne and I were sharing a story of a 7th grader that you taught named Donna. Not this Donna, but another one. And one of the warmest memories of Dianne is her walking outside of the Covenant, praying her daily office. It was a cold day, and she enveloped me in her long black cloak, and we walked together in quiet conversation. I felt a gentle love from her. This is a woman I just met about 2 weeks ago in California. The conversation came around and your name came up. This is the kind of mark we leave on the world that goes beyond theology and different forms of interpretation. This is living the message.
Thank you. It's very kind of you.
So, thank you very much.
My
We're going to
pleasure.
have you back. Is there, Dianne, do you have the times for the next? All right. As we're going through, as Diane's getting it out, want to present you, Sister Dianne, with a couple things, and also just want to thank you for pointing out in the Bibles how Jesus is always passing through. I never thought about that. Sometimes you kind of get that, as people would say, God winker, that thing that pulls you to see that He's asking for you, and sometimes you have to reach out. So today, I never realized that always passing through, and there's an opportunity if you want to act. And have your eyes open because it might be acted upon you.
It's a good thing you came.
Yes, oh yes. So first off, it's the little windbreaker, so when you go to some places warmer, when it gets warmer, have that. And then these are the shirts that we give to all of our Marian athletes and also students. So this is a Marian jersey. On the front, you'll see that it says Marian, and we remind everybody that we are named after the mother of Jesus, probably the most idyllic idea of what a mother should be. High expectations, you better do the right thing, unconditional love. We have a lot to do, and there's a lot of then there's always something for you to do, and know that you have the best mother that's looking out for you, and you better work hard. So that's what Marian means. And then we all have our symbol on there, the lily amongst thorns. with the educational torch in the middle, and just understand that we are here first to learn and to spread knowledge and know that we might be the most beautiful thing wherever the craziness is. Then on the back, sabers. That means absolutely nothing. It was a name made up by people that voted for it, but it is the one thing that connects us all. The only meaning sabers has is how we all work together to be that one thing that makes us who we are. And number 36, we can never forget our foundation, that in 1936, some unbelievable, powerful women said, social justice is most important, and we have to help people learn. So congratulations for everything you've done, and there's your Jersey t-shirt.
Thank you.
All right, the next time that we will gather is not until the new year, January 27th, when we will hear about the integral relationship with the Catholic Church and what it means to be a missionary disciple like she referenced. If you are an Agape Latte follower, that date is going to be in January as well. So we will stay in touch and keep you informed. Thank you so much for coming.
All right, get my stuff out of here.
Would you like this to be here every time now?
You know, it wouldn't hurt. Is it an inconvenience in any way?
I'm going to check with somebody about whether they need to have it up in that classroom. I don't think that classroom's being used.
What do I do next? The missionary disciple.